on some of that. We'll see how it goes. Now, I'm no expert in this, and some of you may say I'm no expert in anything, and I know who you are. But my best guess is that most spiritual traditions recognize some form of a calendar that they follow over the course of a year, or maybe even over the course of many years. Think the Mayans. That is punctuated by events that they recognize in some special fashion. Now, maybe these events feature special music or costumes or the like, but these elements were not usually just random choices made on a whim. They were often chosen because of a deeper, communally understood symbolism relating to some other important idea. In recognizing these events and selecting these symbolic elements, these traditions offered participants opportunities to connect with some story, some legend, some narrative that was greater than themselves, larger than their communities, often much larger. Participants had the chance to truly feel their own personal connection to these stories, to see themselves in them. Now, here at FUS, the most recognizable calendar of events that we celebrate may be that which is contained in the cycle of the seasons. It's a predictable annual cycle, moving from the darkness and quiet of winter through the waxing light of spring and the high sun and abundant growth of summer, through the vibrant decline of fall, and back to winter. In this community, we're at the point now of organizing 6 events over the course of a year to recognize this cycle, this story that is so much larger than any of us in this room, and certainly larger than all of us in this room collectively. Now, if you've been connected with FUS for any period of time, you likely know that just some 6 weeks ago, we gathered downstairs to mark the longest day of the year, summer solstice. 6 months from now, we'll be back in this room to mark the shortest day, the winter solstice. The equinoxes we celebrate up here in this room on Sunday mornings, with children's participation and so on. As a congregation, we organize these events because we believe that it is important in the human experience to remind ourselves of our connection with this great cycle, the cycle of the seasons, which is the result of our planet's delicate dance around the sun. Thanks to the Earth's famous 23-degree axial tilt, which means, and I'm not going to do the arm thing, that's only at winter solstice. That's only at winter solstice, you got to come back for that. Which means that the sunshine expands and contracts over the course of a year with its resulting impact on life here on our planet. Each of us is wrapped in the embrace of this cycle. Each of us will live our lives within its scope. And our events here at FUS, like the equinoxes and solstices, remind ourselves in all of our fancy urbanness that we too have a place in nature, on this planet, in the cosmos. This is the story we connect ourselves to through these celebrations. More recently, we've branched out and added another event in February known as Imbolc. Imbolc is one of the 4 points that are referred to as cross-quarter days, the halfway points between the equinoxes and solstices. Imbolc may be more familiarly known as Groundhog's Day, and 2 of the other cross-quarter days are more familiarly known as May Day, and of course the big one, Halloween. It was about 10 to 12 years ago that we added our very first cross-quarter day, the one that is probably least well known of them all, one that we've come to recognize on the first Sunday of August, known as Lammas. Lammas, as you may recall, is a historic term that is derived from the phrase loaf mass. Much like Christ Mass becomes Christmas, loaf mass, over the course of many years of use, became Lammas. Now, this phrase itself derives from the fact that at this time of the year, at least in certain parts of Europe where many of our ancestors come from, this was the beginning of the harvest season. That may be a somewhat difficult concept to wrap one's mind around today. In an August when it's usually so hot and we're still deep in our summer planning and our summer enjoyment, when we likely think of the harvest as something that happens in the fall, and certainly after Labor Day, not in early August. And that's if we think of harvest at all. Most of us likely shop in stores where whatever food we want is available at any time of the year, regardless of the season. Nevertheless, in these ancient communities, this was the time of year when some of the first crops would be harvested, and prominent among them was wheat that would eventually be milled into flour. And so it was that communities would come together at this time to harvest, to mill, to bake, and share loaves of bread that they would then place at the center of their celebrations. From this came the birth of the loaf mass, in other words, Lammas. Now, I hope that you notice that one sentence contained a number of verbs, including bake and share. You see, when people came together then, or come together now, to mark these or similar occasions, when they're at their most meaningful, these events offer participants a chance to do more than simply show up, sit, watch, listen, then get up and go home, as rewarding as attendance can be. And to be sure, this is exactly the right level of participation for some people. Still, these are events which offer some element of direct participation, where people are invited to take some form of action, like baking and sharing. This action is intended to physically enact the connection between the individual participant and this much greater story that this event celebrates. Typically, this participation is thought of as a ritual. Now, ritual is one of those tricky religious-y words that can sometimes be challenging for us to use here at First Unitarian Society. But nonetheless, whether we use the R word or not, we ourselves do much the same thing here, though of course we do it in our own way. In an article written for the publication The Conversation in December 2022, Michelle Langley, an associate professor of archaeology at Griffith University in Australia, brought an academic lens to this idea. In scientific terms, she wrote, a tradition refers to the passing down of customs and beliefs from one generation to the next. A ritual, on the other hand, is a series of actions performed according to a prescribed order, and which is often embedded in a larger symbolic system, such as religion or philosophy. For example, while celebrating birthdays is a tradition, blowing out the candles on a cake is a ritual. Similarly, while getting married is a tradition, exchanging vows is a ritual. Now, rituals can be created at any time. To become tradition, they only need to be understood and replicated by a wider community. Now, Lammas at FUS began as an exploration of bread in the context of spiritual tradition. Naturally, a somewhat cheeky, possibly unsubtle reference was made at the time to the idea of communion, which, like the word ritual, is one of those things we don't usually think about around here. But we know that even as we speak this morning, people in buildings all over the country, like that big white one right outside the window over here, are being handed pieces of bread on the understanding that this is not just a snack to tide them over to lunch. Rather, this bread has been imbued with a different significance. Whether one is brought up to believe that the bread actually is the body of Jesus or merely represents it, people take part in that ritual with the idea that by eating that piece of bread, they are literally, physically connecting to Jesus and all the importance they attach to him, and beyond this to the broader arc of Christian history and experience. Now, fear not, this is not the direction Lammas 25 is going to take. In fact, if discussing the idea of ritual and communion makes you a little nervous, let's consider this from a different part of the spiritual spectrum. In her 1986 book, Drawing Down the Moon, Witches, Druids, Goddess Worshippers, and Other Pagans in America Today, a book which, by the way, was published by the Beacon Press, the publishing wing of the Unitarian Universalist Association, author Margot Adler writes, "It is important to note that when neo-pagans use the word ritual, they mean something far different from what most people mean. For the majority, rituals are dry, formalized, repetitive experiences. From my own experience of neo-pagan rituals, I have come to feel that they have another purpose: to end, for a time, our sense of human alienation from nature and from each other. Ritual seems to be one method of reintegrating individuals and groups into the cosmos, and to tie in the activities of daily life with their ever-present, often forgotten significance. It allows us to feel the biological connectedness with ancestors who regulated their lives and activities according to seasonal observations. Just as ecological theory explains how we are interrelated with all other forms of life, rituals allow us to recreate that unity in an explosive, non-abstract, gut-level way. Rituals have the power to reset the terms of our universe until we find ourselves suddenly and truly at home. Now, these diverse observations on the idea of ritual show that ritual is not merely the province of one spiritual tradition, but can be a perfectly valid element within a humanist spirituality as well. Now, plainly, at an event commemorating Lammas, a loaf mass involving bread, the actions at the heart of any related ritual will be themselves connected to bread. I mentioned earlier baking and sharing, and right now our dedicated kitchen team is hard at work downstairs baking the delicious bread, which is a tradition here at Lammas. And they will share that with us shortly. For us, the action we will engage in, the ritual if you like, is the good stuff. It's the eating of the bread. So can our participation as a community in this, dare we say it, ritual observation, connect us to the larger story or stories of our collective lives, to, as Margot Adler suggests, reset the terms of our shared universe? Is this even important? Well, in a word, yes. Benjamin Barnett, the author of the Best Interest blog, from whom we heard earlier, makes an important observation about the concept of narrative in our modern culture. He writes, "Discussions surrounding narratives, as with much in the modern world, has been individualized. They have become less about finding your place within the world, making sense of the common journey we find ourselves on with others, and have moved toward an individualist vision of making sense of our own lives, adding form only to our personal journeys, separated from those around us. Narratives in the individualist sense are about making sense of your own life, defining a personal journey, with scant consideration for any wider story we may be a part of." But for Barnett, while there is a value to this approach in that it reinforces the idea of agency in our own lives, he also considers a downside of this more individualized approach. He writes, "Narratives do not just exist on an individual level, and if we view them as such, they have the potential to further detach ourselves from those around us and serve as a tool to further prioritize the individual in our culture. Humans are social animals, and our stories intertwine and are inseparable from those around us. Viewing narratives as individual, regardless of how far we follow that journey, can only get us so far. Viewing our narratives as connected to the individuals and communities around us strengthens our social bonds within a relatively constrained setting. By recognizing the common journeys that we're on, or the fact that our own stories are inextricably linked, we strengthen our connections to one another and have the potential to gain a richer conception of our own identities than is possible using a purely individualistic sense of journey." Well, all of that is fascinating, of course, but seriously, I imagine you're thinking this guy's inviting us to do nothing more significant than just eat some bread. Does this really accomplish anything? Well, again, the answer is yes, but to get there, I want to take what may seem to be a detour into a very different area, but bear with me, it should all make sense, I hope. And for those who may be feeling a little jittery with all this talk of ritual, this detour will involve a lot of science, which is fairly familiar ground for many of us here. Now, if you've endured a few of my talks over the years, you may have discerned that the idea of history tends to pop up with some regularity. I was a history major, and so this can't be helped. Indeed, this is one of the few ways I actually use that degree at all. But as part of my fascination with the past, I have come to have a deep, albeit very amateur, interest in the field of archaeology. I find it amazing to consider how trained archaeologists can find a piece of pottery or some bricks from the foundation of a building and reconstruct broad pictures of the societies in which these random remains were originally created. To try to understand those societies is ultimately the basic point of archaeology. Now, of course, archaeology is also about the examination of human remains as well, with the same goal, to better understand the lives of our forebears. Now, the phrase human remains is usually a euphemism for the harder parts of the human body, like the bones and the teeth, which tend to survive centuries or even millennia under the right conditions, as opposed to the softer parts, such as hair, skin, or internal organs, which typically don't last. For years, archaeologists have been able to look at bones, for instance, and make assessments about the person's sex, possible age, their likely height, and maybe they could see evidence of previous disease or injury. That's certainly a lot, but more recent developments in technology have allowed archaeologists to explore much deeper still. Today, bones and teeth can be coaxed to yield evidence of the location where a person originated from. In an article published in 2016 in the online journal Nature, author Maura Pellegrini and 4 colleagues examined evidence found in teeth belonging to ancient inhabitants of Britain, which allowed them to determine that as a result of considerable migration, there was a broad diversity of genetic and geographic background among the residents. Now, you may find this hard to believe, but the following excerpt was edited for clarity on a Sunday morning. But as these authors explained, oxygen isotopes in human hard tissues are commonly used in archaeological science to study residential changes between childhood and adulthood. For humans, oxygen isotope values in bones and teeth are related to those of local rain and groundwater. A linear correlation also exists between the oxygen isotope value of human skeletal bone phosphate and the precipitation characteristic of the area where the individual lived. This correlation is explained by the fact that the isotopic value of the precipitation falling on a certain area is similar to that of the plant-based food grown by and available to individuals dwelling in that area. If the nutrients are locally sourced, their isotopic composition is ultimately reflected in the bodies of the local residents. Pellegrini continues, because the chemical composition of human tissues is acquired primarily through ingested food and drink, and the isotopic composition of these items is in turn determined by the local climate and environmental conditions, the origins of past populations and individuals can be reconstructed through the chemical analysis of skeletal remains. For the life history of an individual is recorded in the chemistry of his or her body tissues. Now, all of this is a very fancy, sciencey way to say, if a person eats locally grown food, that food will carry with it the signature of the location it was grown in, which will also find its way into the body of the consumer, helping later people identify where that consumer came from. It's certainly reasonable to imagine that this is not just archaeology and that this basic process is still playing out today with you and me. So the upshot of all of this academic speak is really the old adage, you are what you eat. Our molecules remember. So what does all this have to do with Lammas? What if, instead of just enjoying the bread offered after the assembly on its own terms, we imbue that act with a sense of special meaning, and we envisioned that meaning itself becoming a part of us, maybe creating internal clues, perhaps less about where we've been and more about where we hope to go. For those of you who are on site today, you will be invited to join us downstairs to enjoy some of that delicious bread I mentioned earlier, which is likely nearing completion at this very moment. As you do, I invite you to consider that in eating a slice, or an entire loaf, we don't judge. You are not just sating your hunger, but connecting yourself to something bigger, a story in which you have a part. The ingredients for each loaf are the result of inputs like light, soil nutrients, and water. Consuming a slice helps to connect us in however lengthy a chain to the hydrological cycle, the planet, and even to the sun itself, to say nothing of the humans whose labor made it possible. Consider that the act of magically transforming these items into bread at this time of year also connects us to the broader agricultural cycle and to the broader still ongoing march of the seasons. And today's bread selections also have significance. Today we'll enjoy a choice of honey wheat or wild rice breads. You'll hear more later. each of which themselves can connect us to the long story of our home here in Minnesota. Wild rice, of course, is a traditional staple of the diets of the indigenous people who have lived here for millennia, while wheat is a crop imported and transplanted into Minnesota by white settlers. Wheat's presence in Minnesota may seem like an eternal given, but it is in fact bound up in the greater story of Europeans' arrival in and ultimate conquest of North America. On that theme of conquest, it's worth noting that the first wheat flour mill in Minnesota was constructed at Fort Snelling in 1823. While we certainly encourage you to try both the wheat bread and the wild rice bread, and maybe buy a loaf of each to take home, consider that the fact that they're here together is connected to the deeper histories of colonialism, imperialism, and white supremacy. But perhaps let our consumption of them connect us less to that sad story and more to the expanding narrative of overcoming that legacy by working for social justice and reconciliation, much as we are exhorted to do each week in the recitation of our land acknowledgement statement. Finally, consider that in going downstairs and literally breaking bread together, I can't say that, breaking bread together, you are in even this easy way reaffirming your connection to this community. Now, if you're on the FUS Exchange, and if you're new here, or even if you're not, this is a listserv anyone can join from the FUS website. You may have seen a note earlier this spring by Fred Olson, who sent around links to some videos which are now playing on the screen, which were digitized, I believe, by George Green and added to our YouTube channel. These are videos unearthed in the archives from the very early days of the construction and opening of our building in 1951. As you can see on the screen, coming together, baking, and breaking the proverbial bread has been a long-standing tradition here at FUS. If you don't recognize that space yet, here's a hint. The first room was where today's bread is being prepared, and you've been invited to go down into the second room, this one on the screen right now, downstairs after the assembly to enjoy that bread. This is the lower assembly hall 75 years ago. I'm pretty sure, yep, here we go. Here they are again, having refreshments upstairs this time, in the gallery right outside this door. I'm pretty sure in the background Bruce Nelson is giving tours. Interesting, isn't it, to see all these strangers in our building? And yet here they are, still today. After all, these are the people who built this place. Their story is our story, and I invite you to check out the full videos online. Whether we use the word commonly or not, rituals are about connections. Through inviting us to participate in some physical sense, they are about inviting us into a larger story, likely one that has been unfolding since long before we arrived, and which will likely continue long after we're gone. They're a chance to see ourselves, to feel ourselves directly connected to a larger narrative. Consuming food such as bread is one way to take part and to experience that bond, to internalize it, to have it become a part of us, even if on a level we can't easily see. So, come downstairs today. Take, eat, feel your link to the sun, the planet, and the seasons. Come, savor the wheat and wild rice, and let the complex story of our Minnesota home sink into your bones and leave a trace like all the invisible isotopes they contain. Come and be moved toward making our state a community founded now on justice, where, in the words we heard earlier, we work to repair harm and damaged relationships. Come, join with the others here and those who have gone before us here and those who will follow us here, and know that while we love our building, ultimately this place is what it is because of the people like us who pass through it and keep returning. Come, find yourself suddenly and truly at home. Come, yet again, come. And now I invite you to rise.